metaphors chronicle of a match between a princess and a commoner, and the first royal divorce in 400 years, Snowdon and Margaret.
Here at Congerslev School for the Gifted, one child shows an incredible ability to mimic direct shift gearbox technology. Just look at him go. So fast, so smooth.
It was 1965. The Beatles were top of the pops. An American astronaut had walked in space, and the world-famous photographer, Tony Snowdon, and his wife, Princess Margaret, were touring America.
The reaction was tremendous. When they landed, the Beatles had been there not such a long time before, and they were met by the same cheering crowds, the same volume of people lining the tops of buildings at the airport. Here you've got this pop idol couple.
Tony Snowdon was one of the most flamboyant figures of the 60s. Charming, charismatic, trend-setting, talented.
He's one of Britain's best photographers, without a doubt. Quite amazing photographs, not just the formal portraits he's well known for, but the reportage, the fashion, it's all there.
Princess Margaret was the Diana of her day.
Well, I think the whole thing was a fairy story, and fairy stories come to an end.
The Snowdons' 18-year marriage crashed to an end in 1978. Theirs was the first royal divorce for over 400 years and caused shockwaves. At the time, Tony came out on top, and Princess Margaret was blamed for the failure of the marriage and embarrassing the royal family.
It was hard because she wasn't really able to say her side of it. I think Tony had certainly been carrying on with his own life and his own friends in a way that made her humiliated.
The marriage was doomed from the start. Tony's twin obsessions of sex and work left little room for his wife's needs.
Loads of his friends have told me and described to me his great sexual appetite. In fact, one of his friends remarked to me, "If it moves, he'll have it."
Tony Snowdon made the royal family seem sexy, glamorous and modern. But complex and unconventional, he couldn't survive in Margaret's traditional world. Now, for the first time, his friends and family set the record straight about the man, his relationship with Princess Margaret, and his secret love child, born during one of the most tempestuous royal marriages of recent times. The engagement of the photographer, Anthony Armstrong-Jones, to Princess Margaret was announced on the 26th of February, 1960.
Everyone in Britain and the Commonwealth wholeheartedly wishes long years of happiness to the Princess and her fiancé.
Privately, those who knew the couple were horrified. Tony's friend, Jocelyn Stevens, sent him a telegram saying, "Never was there a more ill-fated assignment."
He knew that Tony liked the bohemian kind of life, and he was worried that their two different lives might not get on very well after a certain amount of time because they came from two such completely different backgrounds.
Tony was an upper-class rebel who'd spent his 20s pushing the boundaries of sex, race and class to the limits. Princess Margaret was the sister of the Queen, who'd grown up in a gilded cage.
She could be incredibly grand and very royal, and even, dare one say, very spoilt. But I do believe she was always a little girl looking for love.
Princess Margaret was the product of a stable family background, the adored favourite of her father, George VI. Tony was a boy from a broken home, who'd grown up feeling rejected by his beautiful mother, Anne. She divorced his father, Ronald Armstrong-Jones, when Tony was only 5.
For Tony, that probably was extremely difficult. Anne no longer had the time to be the devoted mother to him.
Tony's mother was image-conscious, artistic, and deeply socially ambitious. Soon after her divorce, she remarried, this time to an Irish peer, the Earl of Ross. Now the mistress of a huge castle in Ireland, she introduced Tony as her ugly son. He and his sister Susan were set aside in favour of his half-brothers, the son and heir Brendan and his brother Martin.
When they travelled on the train, Brendan would be given a little carriage all to himself, but he wasn't allowed to sit where other people sat. The whole place had to be covered with white linen sheets on the walls and on the chairs, and he would be able to sit there alone with his nurse, first class. Martin was allowed to travel second class, and Tony and Susan would travel third class.
Family members believe this rejection had a profound effect on Tony's character.
It drove an ambition in him to prove himself worthy of her love. And I think that went on all his life, right up till her death. He was very fond of her and wanted to seek her love and approval.
The other formative experience of Tony's childhood was being struck down by polio when he was 16. But even then, his mother wasn't there for him.
I'm afraid Anne, I don't think, visited him once in hospital.
Faced with the prospect of being a permanent invalid, Tony forced himself to walk again.
He was lucky to survive. He realised how lucky he was, although it seriously affected one of his legs. It actually left one of his legs slightly shorter than the other. We realised how lucky we were not to have lost a brother altogether.
As if to prove himself, Tony became super active, rowing, shooting, skiing, riding motorbikes. In 1950, he coxed the Cambridge 8 to victory in the boat race.
Polio gave Tony that added spur and ambition, passion to succeed in whatever he did, and proved that he was not just equal to other people, but better than other people.
But there's no fooling about the superiority of the men from Cambridge.
Tony's drive and determination would bring him professional success and a glittering marriage. But his constant desire for new experiences, combined with his feelings of rejection by his mother, would make him rebellious, promiscuous, and at times callous and destructive. A challenging choice for a vulnerable princess. Princess Margaret's future husband, Anthony Armstrong-Jones, always insisted on being called the familiar Tony. He began working as a photographer in 1950, when he was 20. On the surface, he was charming, attention-seeking, and given to slightly cruel practical jokes.
He was very impish, and he had this wicked smile, and of course he was incredibly attractive. And he was small, but you never realised that he was small, because he had this great personality.
Although Tony's mother didn't think photography a suitable career for her son, he exploited his impeccable social contacts and started off taking society pictures. But he quickly developed his own radical style, as his friend and fellow photographer Bob Belton remembers.
He didn't pose people very carefully. He just kept snapping and snapping, and he said to me, "You should get up close with your camera and really up." And I said, "Well, I can't. I find it intrusive." And he said, "Well, that's what being a photographer is all about."
In the mid-50s, Tony pioneered a revolution in theatrical photography. Rejecting conventional studio portraits, he prowled around rehearsals, taking informal shots.
And Tony had this unbelievable gift of making it like a photographed conversation. You were just unaware of him taking pictures. He was fun to be with. He always made you feel that you were the most important person that he wanted to talk to.
Tony had been introduced to the theatre world by his mother's brother, the designer Oliver Messel, photographed here by Cecil Beaton in one of his own creations.
Oliver took on the role of a father to some extent, and Oliver was able to inspire Tony. He helped him in every possible way.
In theatrical circles, it was widely known and accepted that Oliver Messel was gay.
He wasn't sort of girly camp. He was sort of like a camp monkey. These bright boot-button eyes and dark hair and a smile. But he wasn't sort of get you camp.
What's that mean?
Well, that was like that they used to do it those days.
Tony was saturated in Oliver's creative world, where everyone was darling. But when one of Tony's more conventional friends, Anthony Barton, went to dinner with Uncle Oliver, he found the messel set-up slightly alarming.
I suppose I was maybe rather old-fashioned and everything, but I thought it was rather strange that the staff, the male staff, all came round and kissed everybody, including the guests, including me. I wasn't quite sure that was what I was expecting, but it was one thing to be kissed by Oliver Messel, but another thing to be kissed by the staff.
Homosexuality was illegal in the 1950s, but Tony anticipated the 60s in his defiance of conventional sexual attitudes and willingness to camp it up, as in this photograph of him taken on holiday in Italy.
Certainly saw him with a lot of bisexual and homosexual people.
Several of his assistants, his photographic assistants, the girls in his studio in earlier days, thought that he himself was like that.
Rejecting the society world of his mother, Tony embraced the wild side of life. He took pictures of seedy parts of London, like this joint in Canning Town, which he explored with an old friend from Eton, Andy Garnett.
I think he had a taste for louche high life, in that he enjoyed the loucheness, particularly when it was associated with high life.
There was a really funny story about Tony coming back early in the morning at about 5 o'clock on a bus, and he'd been to a rather grown-up fancy dress party. And he was sitting on the bus with all these old dears who were going off to clean offices and things, with their headscarves on. And there was Tony sitting dressed from top to toe in black leather with a whip.
Highly sexed, Tony was also a magnet for women, and in his line of work had plenty of opportunities for casual encounters. In the 1950s, his love life was the kind of sexual free-for-all which for most people didn't kick in until the late 60s.
There was a constant succession of girlfriends, and loads of his friends have told me and described to me his great sexual appetite. In fact, one of his friends remarked to me, "If it moves, he'll have it."
Tony didn't just go after society beauties. In the mid-50s, he caused a stir in upper-class circles when he started dating a Chinese girl from Trinidad, actress and rising star Jacqueline Chan.
She was exotic, you see, because we hadn't seen many Chinese. We hardly knew what China was. I think he was ahead of his time. There weren't many Chinese girls around to have affairs with. But that's quite sort of typical of his unconventionality, I think, it was having a Chinese girlfriend.
Jackie was the first real love of Tony's life, but she was just one of many girlfriends. What no one has known until now is how Tony, restless and elusive, was running several women at the same time. At the end of 1957, he photographed a stunning 18-year-old debutante, Gina Ward.
They clicked instantly, and they did have this really passionate affair, and she fell deeply in love with him.
This was the man, reckless, promiscuous, creative, secretive and unconventional, who in February 1958 went to a dinner party and met Princess Margaret, one of the most eligible women in the world.
She thought he was jolly amusing, and she told me afterwards that she didn't think he was interested in women, so wasn't too sure that they would ever meet up again.
Princess Margaret was at a vulnerable point. 28, she was recovering from a long love affair with group captain Peter Townsend. They'd wanted to marry, but he was divorced, and in the 1950s, divorce was a scandal. Margaret had finally said publicly that she couldn't marry Townsend because Christian marriage was indissoluble.
When she issued this statement saying that mindful that Christian marriage is indissoluble, these were not just words on a piece of paper. They were heartfelt because, above all, Princess Margaret was incredibly religious.
At the time she met Tony, Princess Margaret took her religion so seriously, she was involved in a prayer group. But the public saw only the glamour.
I do remember an editor of a newspaper saying to me that the two most sought-after women to photograph in the world at that particular time were Elizabeth Taylor and Princess Margaret.
One of her many admirers wanted a picture of her. Who better to take it than Tony? This time, a sexual spark was lit. Tony started secretly dating Princess Margaret and introduced her to a new world, offbeat and edgy. He took her to his studio in a scruffy part of Pimlico. He entertained her in a room he kept in a converted pub in Rotherhithe, in the London docks.
I think that she thought she was having a taste of real bohemian life, and I think that gave her pleasure.
But Princess Margaret had no idea just how wild her new boyfriend was, and she didn't know that as a result of his troubled relationship with his mother, he had never been a one-woman man.
It may seem strange that while he was falling deeply in love with Princess Margaret, he was still carrying on with Jackie Chan and Gina Ward, but I don't think that sexual fidelity has ever been a keynote of Tony's character.
Two people in on the secret of Tony's royal romance were his friends, Jeremy and Camilla Fry.
They were sort of bohemian early on. They were the first 50s, 60s people.
Jeremy had been a regular at Tony's studio. Both of them were inventors.
He was the meaning of the word charisma. He was astonishing. He got green eyes. If he wanted you to do something, he would pin you against the wall behind you and fixing his eyes on you.
Jeremy Fry was bisexual, enormously attractive to both men and women. Jeremy was one of the most important figures in Tony's life. He was probably his dearest friend.
In 1955, Jeremy had married Camilla Grinling, one of Tony's many ex-girlfriends, who'd remained a close friend.
Tony, I know, loved going to stay with them, and it was a very important part of his life. I think he was happier there. They were, I think, definitely his favourite friends.
In the autumn of 1959, Tony went to stay several times with the Frys, without Princess Margaret, with consequences that would only be revealed years later.
During these weekends, they went in for a kind of experimentation that became fairly standard among certain sets in the 60s. Quite a lot went on there. Of course, Tony and the Frys, they were very much at the cutting edge, very avant-garde, and so a lot went on. They took quite a lot of alcohol. The result was that, really, inhibitions were fairly readily shed. They were all extremely close. Tony was still extremely fond of Camilla, and when inhibitions are shed, latent attraction always comes to the fore. Camilla and Tony were still deeply fond of each other, and at some point, it appears, they became lovers again.
Tony wasn't just having a fling with Camilla. There was also Gina and Princess Margaret. Never predictable, this was the moment he chose to make a commitment and propose to the Queen's sister. Deeply in love, she wanted a stable marriage like her parents and sisters. But she was pinning all her hopes of future happiness on an emotionally insecure serial seducer.
She wrote to her lady-in-waiting saying that I'm engaged to the most heavenly man. We're so happy it's unbelievable.
Over dinner at their London house, Tony broke the news of his engagement to his family.
We were, I think, each so stunned that it was very difficult to find words, because it came as such an amazing surprise that no words came easily. So Tony naturally said, "Goodness, I thought you'd be pleased."
Tony's mother, of course, Lady Ross, was thrilled with the engagement. It was the fulfilment of her wildest social dreams, and, of course, she was all over Tony then. He was showered with her approval.
Before the official announcement, the bridegroom had to tie up a few loose ends from his previous lives. He told Jackie Chan and his girlfriend, Gina Ward, that he was engaged. Then he arranged to see Tom Parr, one of his gay friends, to check whether any photographs he'd taken of them on holiday could be misinterpreted.
It was only when the engagement was announced that Tom Parr realised that he was looking through them just in case there was anything sort of possibly compromising in them that he had to know about.
Tony and Princess Margaret's first outing as a newly engaged couple was to the opera. Behind the scenes, a worried friend asked her whether she realised what a handful Tony would be.
She said, "He's bohemian. He won't always be home for dinner. You won't always know where he is. You won't always know what he's doing. You won't always be there. Can you cope with that?" And the princess, flushed, of course, with love, said, "Yes, that's fine. Of course I can cope with it."
The couple were cheered when they appeared in public, but privately, the old guard at Buckingham Palace were concerned. One told a friend, "The boy Jones has led a very diversified and sometimes a wild life, and the danger of scandal and slander is never far off." Almost immediately, the palace's fears were confirmed. Tony wanted his closest friend, Jeremy Fry, to be his best man. But the courtiers discovered that in 1952, Jeremy had been fined £2 for importuning in Hyde Park.
He'd been arrested for beguiling guardsmen, if that's the word, and in the park. And so there was a big hoo-ha about it.
In 1960, a bisexual best man was not on at a royal wedding. It was announced that Jeremy Fry was ill. Tony's new best man was the distinguished neurologist and old friend of Princess Margaret's, Dr. Roger Gilliatt.
I think he was very surprised to be asked, yes, very surprised. I think quite a lot of people were quite surprised, including Roger.
A princess of unique personality, gay, intelligent, compellingly human, was marrying the man of her own choice.
Tony and Princess Margaret were married in Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May 1960.
Groom and best man came towards their places. Already in hers was the Countess of Ross, Mr. Armstrong Jones's mother. The best man was Dr. Roger Gilliatt.
The public were thrilled that the troubled princess was marrying for love. Meanwhile, Andy Garnett, who was keeping the banished Jeremy Fry company, took a different view.
What I did think about was his courage. You know, first of all, the royal family and all their various bodyguards of elderly men and elderly disapproving women. And next, the idea of walking up the nave of Westminster Abbey with umpteen million people staring at him on their TVs. And then spending his honeymoon on a ship with 350 horny matelots. If that doesn't call for courage, I really don't know what does.
To the delight of everybody,
in the early days of the marriage, Tony gave up work and kept his wild maverick side under wraps. He walked several paces behind his wife, kept his mouth shut, and tried to fit in with Princess Margaret's world of rigid protocol.
At the college, Her Royal Highness presented the Queen's Sword to Midshipman Wallace, watched by her husband, to whom the royal round of engagements is still very new.
I think it tickled his fancy, I should think, to be married to Princess Margaret. He acted as if he enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed all the social thing, and he enjoyed all the people around, and he enjoyed the precedence.
Friends noticed the sexual chemistry between the couple.
They were obviously in love, and everybody could see it, that they were together all the time. They moved together to whatever side of the room. They stuck together very closely.
It was like an electric current. They were very tactile, they're very touching and loving and all the rest in a way that had really not been expected, I suppose, of a royal couple before.
Their first child, David, was born on the 3rd of November 1961.
Viscount Linley, aged 4 weeks, in the arms of his beautiful mother.
Initially reluctant to take a title, Tony had relented and became the Earl of Snowdon. He was a devoted father to his 2 children.
He always treated them the moment they could walk and talk a bit like grown-ups, which children actually love, I think. And so he always made, whatever he did with them, he made them interested. He explained how it worked, showed them how to make or mend things. And he was very, very good with his children.
The Snowdons appeared to have everything, including a beautiful home in Kensington Palace, which Tony designed himself. But none of this was enough for him.
His friend Jocelyn Stevens said it must have been like a pilot giving up his career for his marriage, but looking up at every aircraft flying by and thinking, I should be up there.
After only 2 years, Tony wanted to escape the royal treadmill. In 1962, the Sunday Times scored a major coup and secured the services of one of Britain's top photographers.
Assignment number 1 for pressmen, a picture of Lord Snowdon arriving at the Sunday Times.
Over the years, Tony would produce a vast range of iconic work. His inability to stand still would bring him huge success. But the same forces would ultimately destroy his marriage. The demons which had driven him as a young man were neither dead nor buried. In the mid-60s, the Snowdons were by far and away the most glamorous members of the royal family. Super modern, they took up water skiing. All the happening people of the day turned up at their legendary parties. Rudolf Nureyev, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, Mary Quant, Hollywood royalty.
I remember going for dinner when they had Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, and it was a mixture of all sorts of, particularly the artistic world, but I don't think she would have known so many of them if it hadn't been for Tony, and she really enjoyed meeting all those different people, and a lot of them became great friends, like Peter Sellers.
Princess Margaret was happy to party with Tony's friends, but she could never forget she was royal, and no one else was allowed to forget it either.
The only disconcerting thing most people found about them when they came to dinner was that she was a very, very fast eater, and you're not supposed to eat after royalty have finished. And so most people never got much of a first course. Luckily, she then took a break for smoking so you could catch up.
If you overstepped that mark, became a little too familiar, perhaps, then she would become very royal and very grand, and you would be put in your place. And this, very often, it could be with just a look, it could be with a withering remark. Her very bright blue eyes would turn icy, and you had gone too far.
Friends noticed that Tony was beginning to find his wife's high and mighty ways annoying. And after 4 or 5 years, the novelty of royal life was wearing thin.
It irritated the hell out of him. He couldn't do with all that etiquette. He got very dragged down by it sometimes, and I'm sure he felt irked by it when he really wanted to do things that he couldn't.
It became known on the Sunday Times that Lord Snowdon liked to go on trips abroad. Princess Margaret, who filled her spare time with little hobbies, was on her own more and more.
She didn't like it at all. And she would ring up while he was at work, and I would generally have to answer the phone and say that he was doing the pictures and he couldn't come to the telephone. So it was quite difficult having to make some excuse.
Princess Margaret began to have a very shrewd suspicion that when he was away on his travels, he was, so to speak, playing away. And I think there may well have been a bit of truth in that.
The more Tony cut loose, the more insecure Princess Margaret became. The couple started having blistering rows, even in public, and Tony treated his wife dismissively, as witnessed at a party by Mary Gilliatt.
About 1 o'clock, Tony came up to us and said, Do you mind driving me home? I'm feeling rather tired and I've got a very early appointment in the morning. And we said, what about Princess Margaret? And he said, oh, she's fine, she's fine.
Tony left his wife behind. Once back at Kensington Palace, Tony, no longer tired, kept the Gileads chatting.
Suddenly the doors flung open and there was Princess Margaret in floods of tears. I mean, she was really crying. And I thought, this is extraordinary to have the Queen's sister sobbing on my shoulder because her husband had left her at a party. We had then to realise that, there really were great strains in the marriage.
The Snowdons' friends, the Stephens, saw Tony's increasing hostility towards his wife when they went on holiday together in 1965.
They'd had a slight difference of agreement about something, and Tony decided to climb up onto the roof. We got a telephone call where we were staying from Princess Margaret saying, please come and help me because Tony's on the roof and we can't get him down.
Jocelyn Stevens went out and said to him, what's happening here? And Tony said, it's the only place I can get away from the bloody woman.
Although there were rumours of marriage difficulties, the physical side of the Snowdons' relationship remained strong. But as well as sex, Princess Margaret wanted emotional intimacy. In a note to her husband, she said that she hated the silent treatment and the dreaded fed-up sighs, and wanted nice, cosy affection.
I think Princess Margaret would actually quite have liked to have had a heart-to-heart talk with Tony about this. But as she once put it to me, he never wanted to have that sort of thing. He'd always leave the room.
Princess Margaret became more and more possessive and demanding. She begged Tony to stay with her, but he insisted on going on long work trips abroad. Deeply unhappy, she had a couple of brief affairs.
Princess Margaret was not naturally an unfaithful person. And had she not felt neglected by Tony, then I don't think she would have had these relationships. She said, it became an open marriage and it was not something I really wanted to be a party to.
Tony reacted to his wife's infidelity by retreating even more from her. He threw himself into making TV documentaries. Moved by his childhood experience of polio, he became a passionate campaigner for the disabled and designed a special chair.
It started about 3 years ago when I did the first prototype, which was an ordinary plastic mobile platform for Quinton crew.
When he wasn't working, Tony asserted his independence from his wife by doing up a derelict property, Old House in Sussex, which belonged to his family, including digging a lake.
He did it in a sort of secret way. He didn't really get her interested in it, and I don't think she felt that she was part of it at all. So she really wasn't so happy about being there or having anything to do with it.
In Sussex, Tony became friendly with his neighbours, the Marquis and Marchioness of Reading, and particularly with their daughter.
She was heaven, Jackie. Tall and leggy and funny and naughty and still is, and this rather dirty laugh and wrinkles up her nose, and she was divine. She was quite hippie too. I mean, she was completely unconventional, Jackie. He loved that sort of rebel side of Jackie.
No one had more of a ringside seat on the activities of his masters than Princess Margaret's chauffeur, John Larkin. One day she told him to drive her to Tony's bolt hole for an unscheduled visit.
He said, very well, Your Royal Highness. And he thought, oh dear, here's trouble, because he slightly knew that things were not quite what they seemed. And he thought, how do I warn Lord Snowdon? What do I do? And coming up the drive, he did the only thing he could think of. He flashed his headlights on and off very, very quickly. And duly, Tony appeared at the door, embraced Princess Margaret warmly, said, darling, how lovely to see you. Then he looked straight at John Larkin and said, Larkin, the Aston needs filling up. And John Larkin, who knew perfectly well there was petrol in the tank of the Aston Martin, said, very good, my lord, and drove it off to the nearest village. When he got there, he stopped, opened the boot, out hot Jackie.
Tony, now 39, was having a passionate affair with a woman 16 years his junior. But ironically, his standing in the royal family couldn't have been better.
Tony was always very careful. He was very fond of the Queen and the Queen Mother, and he was always very nice to them. Very nice.
Whatever they knew about problems in his marriage, the Queen and Queen Mother were sympathetic to Tony.
There was definitely this feeling amongst the family that because Margaret could be difficult, because she was rather temperamental, that it was more her fault than Tony's.
In 1969, the Queen made her respect for Tony clear when she asked him to stage the investiture of Prince Charles.
He was a good choice. He's a designer, had a great sense of theatre, was married to the Queen's sister, got himself up in some very smart uniform. It went extremely well. And I think at that stage the royal family were very supportive of him.
Tony pulled off a brilliant modern take on royal pageantry, but behind the scenes his private life was falling apart. His relationship with Jackie was widely known, and in January 1971 the papers threatened to break the story. All concerned denied it. Then Jackie confessed the truth to her horrified parents.
The Reddings were incandescent. They obviously forbade Jackie to have anything more to do with him, and they completely brought down the shutters on their friendship with Tony. This whole episode was very upsetting indeed. He felt that life again was closing in on him, and he began to feel a sort of sense of despair, you know.
Tony took out his frustrations on his wife.
A close friend of the princess's told me that Princess Margaret was convinced that on the morning she had some frightfully important engagement in the evening. That is when Tony would engineer a row so that her eyes were red and swollen for the evening.
Tony would leave nasty notes for Princess Margaret, perhaps in the book she was reading or in her glove drawer. And the most famous was one that said, "You look like a Jewish manicurist, and I hate you."
Tony's behaviour towards Princess Margaret stemmed from his childhood experience of an absent mother.
He found it, to some kind of subconscious level, very difficult to trust women. There was always a sense of testing the boundaries, seeing how far you could go, and perhaps pushing and pushing just to see, will that person give way or crack or break or go over the edge or whatever. And of course, if you go on and on and on, very often they do.
To those close to him, it seemed that Tony was hell-bent on destroying his marriage. Unknown to the general public, he now began an affair with his future wife, divorcee Lucy Lindsay Hogg, with whom he worked. He spent much of his time at her flat, just around the corner from Kensington Palace. Princess Margaret knew all about it.
She became desperately unhappy. She started to put on weight. She started to drink too much. And there were tearful midnight conversations, and sometimes a little bit later with friends, with ladies in waiting. She was very, very unhappy, very low, very lonely.
Too late, Princess Margaret was confronting what marriage to a man like Tony meant.
I think that probably fate hung a bit heavy over it from the beginning. He had a roving eye, and I think that Princess Margaret might have had as well.
In 1973, Margaret, deeply hurt by Tony's rejection of her, found comfort in a relationship with a man some 17 years her junior, Roddy Llewellyn.
Paradoxically, we find that Tony resents the presence of Roddy in the princess's life like mad. "Tell your friend to keep out of my house," he said. But
for Princess Margaret, Roddy was just what she needed. In early 1976, she took him to her holiday home on the Caribbean island of Mustique. The News of the World splashed a photograph of them on its front page. Tony finally had his get-out-of-jail card.
When Tony saw the photograph, this was too much for him. It was one thing that he actually felt he could not tolerate, and at the same time, he could leave with the feeling that he could justifiably claim that he was the injured party.
The couple's separation would be announced on the 19th of March 1976. Back then, a royal divorce, the first for 400 years, was a nightmare for the monarchy. The princess was blamed.
The public actually didn't like what they saw. It's the old thing, isn't it, of the older woman and the younger man. But it, in fact, really kind of damaged Princess Margaret's standing. Irreparably.
Meanwhile, Tony arrived in Australia, where he was making a film, and held an impromptu press conference.
I'm naturally desperately sad in every way that this had to happen.
Princess Margaret was supposed to have commented that she'd never seen such good acting. However, most people felt sorry for Lord Snowdon, the wronged husband.
Well, Princess Margaret, her press wasn't very friendly. And, as someone said, Tony came out of it smelling of roses.
Tony would continue his relationship with Lucy. Princess Margaret would continue to be vilified, despite the fact that her relationship with Roddy ended in 1980. Now approaching 50, Tony had escaped from the confines of royal life. But in the years to come, revelations would emerge that would put Margaret's indiscretions in the shade, including one from the time of their engagement that would have rocked the royal marriage to its foundations. When Princess Margaret and Tony Snowdon divorced in 1978, she was devastated. Divorce went against her religious beliefs and her sense of duty as a member of the royal family. Over the years, her health deteriorated.
She was much more miserable and showed her misery after they split up. And she often used to ring us up quite late, about 2 in the morning or something, and say, could we go round and things. I imagine she'd done lots before. She got really, really lonely and sad.
Meanwhile, Tony's career went from strength to strength. He jetted around the world, photographing everyone who was anyone.
What I found amazing is that Snowdon, on the whole, was far more famous as an individual, both as a photographer and somebody in British society, than the people we photographed. So immediately people were in awe of the photographer. I think he was very keen to just strip that away, actually, and get to the soul of the person.
But apart from the celebrity photography, Tony was busy on another front. He set up the Snowdon Awards, which helped disabled young people, and continued to produce campaigning photographs highlighting the plight of the dispossessed and the desperately ill.
We've always called it the Madonna and Child because it really symbolised what we wanted to show, which was the compassion that there was amidst all the misery and the sadness. And he is passionate about disabled people.
Crucially, Tony had remained on good terms with the royal family, who were grateful to him for never having spilled the beans.
There are so many things he could have written about, could have said, so many remarks, so many disclosures about the royal family, and he absolutely never has. He did keep his mouth absolutely shut.
Tony's marriage to Lucy seemed much less volatile, but away from the public gaze, Tony hadn't changed. History was repeating itself. He was up to his old tricks.
One of his assistants once said to me, Tony was absolutely brilliant at keeping a lot of balls in the air at once, like a juggler, but just occasionally something would go wrong. And just like with a juggler, if he misses one, the whole lot crash to the floor and there's a good deal of fallout. Well, this has happened once or twice in Tony's life.
On New Year's Eve 1996, a journalist called Anne Hills committed suicide. She'd worked with Tony on his campaigns for the disabled, but the papers revealed that Tony had been having an affair with her throughout his marriage to Lucy.
It was a very obviously a very delicate time, very tricky time, and ended up talking about it, Tony and I. Again, very difficult because at some point someone had to make a decision whether it was going to be a divorce, whether it was going to be, a moving out. There had to be a reaction. And I got the feeling Tony had a sort of rather French view to the whole thing. Well, these things happened, and maybe very selfish and very, very male.
Still, Lucy stayed with Tony. But now, aged 67, he was about to make headlines again. He embarked on another affair, this time with Melanie Cable-Alexander, over 30 years his junior, who became pregnant. Tony's son Jasper was born in April 1998.
I think it completely threw him. The whole thing actually was rather vulgar in a sense that maybe in the past relationships were between the adults involved, and yes, people got hurt along the way, but it was never as public. I think that was all very unexpected.
Lucy moved out.
I mean, that Tony, until recently, was very restless. And when other women were involved, let alone a child, I don't think she could stand it anymore.
But an even greater revelation has only just emerged. Jasper is not Tony's only love child. Just 3 weeks after Tony's marriage to Margaret in 1960, his close friend Camilla Fry, hostess of freewheeling, lively house parties, had given birth to a daughter, Polly. Friends had hinted to her that Tony, not Jeremy Fry, might be her father. Now in her 40s, she came to see him.
She said, "Can we settle it one day or another?" And he said, yes. And they each took a DNA test, and he was the father. I mean, it was very surprising to realise that Polly had actually been conceived while Tony was seeing Princess Margaret.
The truth about Polly's paternity has only just been publicly confirmed. But true to form, Lord Snowdon remains silent. And so Princess Margaret, who died in 2002, was unaware that her husband's first child was conceived around the time of their engagement. Tony is now 78, but friends testify to his enduring ability to put the past behind him and move on.
If he has had bad and unhappy moments and he thinks, well, that's it, been through that, done that, I can't do anything about it, it's happened, I must move on and to the next thing. He's that sort of person, I think. Now, he's done quite a bit of moving on. He's a free spirit, Tony, and always has been.
Tony Snowdon's childhood experience of an absent mother and serious illness shaped his personality and fueled his determination to succeed. But the same forces made him incapable of fidelity and ultimately destroyed his marriages. One of his best friends described Tony as maddening, stubborn and wayward, forever doing the unexpected. Life with him may have been hell at times, but it was never boring. And perhaps that's what Princess Margaret wanted. Whether that's what she needed is another matter.
If you missed this chronicle of The Princess and the Commoner, catch up on Channel 4+1 next. Tomorrow, Gok Wan and Alexa Chung are searching for celebrity secrets and the most stylish person in Britain. Gok's Fashion Fix starts tomorrow at 8. But guess who's still in jail and who's up for eviction? Only 3 minutes till Big Brother.